So in the last section we talked about starting to customize the software to suit our requirements, and this is the first step. Over the next sessions we're going to look at completely making it to suit our own requirements, and I'll be showing you how to do that. But just a couple of things to notice. First of all, that there's been an upgrade from 6.75 to 6.76, and that's downloaded well and in there. The other thing is that you may recall that we got rid of the grid and the snapping, and as we've got a new project on the way now, there it is again. And that's one of the things that we're going to eliminate when we get further down in these tutorials, customizing to suit. So I will remove them again just to remind you: options, snap, stroke, grid, and we get rid of the snapping and the grid itself, and we can start from scratch. Now in here I have, as you can probably see, a number of errors. The old dog click has been working again, and the first part here is as I did in the first recording that we did, was just to preamble, and we want rid of that preamble. So I'm going to place my playhead there and press S, select the section here and delete, and as I've got ripple editing on, it's dragged it across here. Now I'm going to turn ripple editing off because I want to demonstrate something to you. Let's just have a look up here, as I know this section is where I made a cough, and well, let's just listen to it and see how we go. By placing the camera, better have a click, by placing the camera so you can see what's happened there, and I just want to remove that. So in the normal way, our playhead is here, press S for split, and it finishes here. S for split, select here, delete. Ripple's not on, so we would have to drag it up to the point where we wanted it so that the speech continued and flowed. But I'm going to go backwards. Control Z, Z, Control Z. Okay, that's back to where we started, and we had the playhead here. One of the features of Reaper is that it has a number of actions, and we're also able to make our own actions. So let's have a look at that. Actions, show action list, and we can make a customized new action. So new custom action, let's drag that out a bit so we can see it a bit better. Move that across out of the way. We're going to call this, well, I've called it Ripple Delete Editing in Time Selection. Call it what you want really, but that's what I'm going to call it. So one of the first things that I need to do is to set the ripple editing to start. So let's have a look. Set ripple, can't spell it, that's why it can't find anything. Set ripple, here we go. Perhaps a bit more detail editing, of course, because it's ripple editing. There we go. Set ripple editing per track. So I'm going to drag that in there. Right, get rid of that. The next thing that we want to do is to split the item on a time selection. So let's see if we can do that. I guess we're probably going to have to look at item, split selection, split items on time selection. That's one, that'll do, that's fine. Now then, we want to remove from the time selection the area that we want rid of. So let's time selection, if I can spell again, remove contents. Time selection, remove contents of time selection. Yeah, that's the one that we want. And finally, because we've removed items, we want the cursor, the playhead, to be at the point of the end of the time selection. So let's have a look at that. Go to end of time selection. So we'll do that, and we'll say OK. Now we've got this custom, it's the ripple delete editing in time selection. So we've got that, but we can do it with a keystroke, and we can allocate a keystroke, if I can speak. So let's have a look. Where do we add? Oh, shortcuts and actions. Add. What I want to add here is a keystroke, and the one that I'm going to add is the /, which is at the bottom of the keyboard at the right hand end. So let's type it in there. OK, and it's appeared there. So that's fine. Let's have a look now. So I'm going to close that, and we should have, let's move the cursor out of the way, or the playhead. And if we do a time selection, so we can put the mouse cursor at the top here, drag it across to there, and if I press the let's have a look, it's probably a bit too far that way. If I press that key now, it should disappear and the cursor, the playhead, go to the end of it. Absolute magic. Isn't that wonderful? And that's the beauty of Reaper. That is just one of the ways in which we can speed things up for our editing. And of course, if I go down to the next one, let's assume it's here. I'm not going to listen to everything. Let's put a time selection in here. Let's say it was there, and keystroke, that's gone. Let's have a look at this here. We must have done something wrong here. I'm just demonstrating how easy it is now to use that. There we go, time selection, keystroke, it's gone, and it's all joined together. So that's using a special custom action to help us with speedier editing. Now I'm going to go on to add some effects, but we'll just have a slight pause, and very shortly I'll be back setting up those. Perhaps the three most used effects that we would have for a voiceover and use on a regular basis would be noise reduction, EQ, and compression, although that's not always necessary, and I know for some people they find that that modifies the soundtrack too much, but we're going to look at those one by one. So select the track, view, FX browser, and we'll look at these one at a time. So first of all, clear that filter, and we're going to look at a noise gate. So I'm just going to type in there gate, and we're going to use the Reaper's own independent, or integrated should I say, noise gate. So what have we here? Well, we have a threshold. What's the threshold? That's the first thing that we need to look at. Well, the threshold is the level at which the noise gate opens to allow the signal through, and in order to help us get that, we're going to just create a little soundtrack at the end here, which gives us the ambient noise, and therefore the level at which we need to reduce the noise. So the ambient noise is the noise that's within our setup. That's the room that we're in, the equipment that we're using, the microphone that we're using, how we are breathing in the space. It's just to give us an idea of what that ought to be. So I'm going to arm the track, and then I'm going to keep quiet as we just do a short recording. Okay, so that should be enough. Let's just drag this this way, get to the beginning of it, and let's see what levels there are in the threshold. The first part was when it heard me use the mouse. So let's just ignore that to start with and go from somewhere there. So let's have a look at what it's going to be. And we can see it's about that level there. Stop talking because obviously my voice is making an impact. What I'll do is disarm the microphone, the recording from the track, so we'll just play it again so we can see where exactly it is on here. So here we go again. And you can see it's round about this level here. So when it stops, remembering that point there, it's about there, so we perhaps take it that wee bit higher, somewhere around 40 in this instance. Please remember that this is not a definitive amount, it is the amount that is here in this room with this microphone with me sat at the desk. So that's the threshold set, and that is the level at which we will start to hear a signal coming through. It actually only occurs in the, let's go back to the beginning, at the end of sentences. This is where it comes into action. Anywhere where there's noise above the threshold. So once we start speaking, we're at a voice level, a signal level that is above the threshold. However, you can see that we have a number of other settings on here, and I just want to go through those. And the first one that I want to look at is not the first on the list, it's the attack. And effectively the attack is the fade in time after the threshold's reached and the gate allows the signal to pass through. And obviously it needs to be fairly quick, but we don't want it as a thump. Now that's probably an exaggeration saying it's a thump, but sometimes if you have too little on there, then what will happen is there will be a noise as the gate opens. So it is the fade in time after the threshold has been reached and the gate is allowed to open, and usually round about 5 milliseconds is adequate. So we're going to leave that at 3 milliseconds on here. So what's the next one we want to look at? Well, pre-open, we'll go back to that. That is the time before the threshold is reached that the noise gate starts to open. Now, I know it sounds unusual, but of course it is processing the signal all the time, and the pre-open is, as I say, it's the time before the threshold is reached, the signal level threshold. It's the time before that's reached that the noise gate starts to open, and probably about 5 milliseconds. So we're going to have that at around about 5. Bear in mind these are arbitrary. You need to listen to your recording as you go along. So what about hold? Well, that actually is the wait time after the signal has reduced. In other words, between a sentence you've stopped speaking. That is the time after that it's required after dropping below the threshold. Again, it needs to have a little bit of time to be able to do that, and nominally it is, well, let's say around about 150 milliseconds. Doesn't want to be too quick or too slow. If we happen to set it too short, the gate can close and probably cut off the endings of words. Okay, now the next one is the release, and basically that's the fade out time when the noise gate closes at the end of the hold period. So we can put that at around about 35 milliseconds. And essentially now we have the noise gate set up, but we don't have a preset, and we can create a preset. So I'm going to add that preset. I'm going to save it, and we're going to call it voice gate and say OK. Now once you are happy with that, you can save that as a default. So I'm going to save it as a default. I'm going to assume that we've set everything just as it should be for our own personal setup. And obviously this is a very quick review of this. We can't spend all the time on a tutorial listening to every word end and word beginning. So we're going to save this as a default. Okay. So what's the next thing on the list? Well, it was EQ, and again we're going to bring down our browser, View, FX Browser, and we take the gate out. We've already got that. Let's put EQ in, and again we're going to go for the software writers. Again, take that into the effects. So we now have to close that window, perhaps bring this up a little larger so we can see it better. So here we are now with our EQ, and it's flatlined, as they say, so nothing is happening. It's not either increasing or reducing the signal, whichever way you want to look at it. It is just flatlined. Now, with the human voice, let's take our first one, which is our low shelf. These are the low frequencies at the left, the high frequencies at the right. And there are very few voices that have any levels below 80 Hertz. So what we can do is drag this down here and set a level of about, well, let's say just under 80. That's probably the best way of doing it. In fact, what I'm going to do here, you can see the frequencies being set. I'm going to type in, let's say for argument's sake, 78 and be on the safe side. I'm going to leave the gain at minus 120 and the bandwidth at 2. Those are things that can be adjusted later if we feel that it's necessary to do that. So that's our low frequencies, our low shelf. Now, the other thing, of course, is that at the top end, in the high frequencies, it's highly unlikely that there is anything in a human voice in speech which would be above 12,000, 14,000 Hertz. So I'm going to grab that, drag it down as we did at the lower end, and around about, well, let's say, 13,500, that's near enough. Let's bring it down to the bottom. So we're down at 12. Let's take it to 13. Anywhere there, that's round about right. We're not setting it exactly right, but I would suspect that there are very few of us, if any, that have any frequencies in their voice that go into that sort of a level. So that's the high shelf. So we've got roll off on the bass, and we've cut back on the high frequencies as well. Now, one of the things that we can do is use the second one here, and this is for a frequency band. Now, what I'm going to do is to just run the speech for the voiceover for a short period and just watch the waveform. One of the most useful pieces of equipment which will assist you in taking better landscape photographs is a tripod. And what I've done is taken it to an area where the first of the dips in the waveform could be seen. Let's just show you again. One of the most useful pieces of equipment which will assist you in taking better landscape. What I can do with that is bring it down just a small amount. Now what I'm doing here is to make changes at a specific point which will fade out either side, on the higher side and the lower side of the frequencies. So now what I'm going to do on this one, because I know roughly where it needs to be, again, this is for my setup, it's around about 186 Hertz, and I'm going to set the gain at 2. That seems unusual. -2, of course, not 2. let's call it -2. Type it in, it's easier. And then the bandwidth, I'm going to take that down a bit so that it's not as big a band, somewhere around 1.2, something like that. That's okay. So what we have there is something that will take out the boxiness of our recordings. It really does help. And if you've got a boxy sound, well, one, perhaps it's not just the recording, it could be the room itself. You need, as we had a look at in the early days of these tutorials preparing to record, we need to be in a room that has soft furnishings all round. And if I can remember, I'll put a photograph in of my setup, which is actually using duvets on the wall. I have a big duvet on the wall at the back of me, covers the whole wall. I have duvets under a shelf and on the wall in front of me. The only problem with doing a tutorial is that you have a computer screen and there is always the chance of reflections from there. So the duvets, hopefully I'm doing an adequate job dampening the reflections of the sound. Likewise, I've got carpet tiles on my table here to absorb some of the reflections there. So that's what I've done with that. Right, point 3. Well, there's very little to do with that. We can drag it across round to about 5 Hertz. Somewhere around there. There is a point that you can actually take that down a touch, and that might help with a little bit of de-essing if necessary, but in general I would leave it somewhere around there. And of course that is our setting. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to uncheck these. I'm just going to play a short section and you make your own mind up whether they actually have an effect. It will only be subtle, and you may need headphones to listen to that, but we are adjusting the EQ and the noise. So let's just play a little amount. In fact, what I'll do, I'll set them on here so that they are on, and then I'll take them off on the track itself, and then I'll put them on as the track goes along. One of the most useful pieces of equipment which will assist you in taking better landscape photographs is a tripod. If you have never used one, you will be amazed at the difference it will make to both composition and also the sharpness of your images. So hopefully, we're still playing, let's stop the playing. So hopefully you did notice a slight difference there, but it is subtle, and those are the ones that we will probably use the most. Now we're going to have a look at compression, and to do that we go to our View, FX Browser, just clear that filter again and put in Comp. And again we're using Reaper's own version of that. Drag it to the track. We can close the effects down now, and we see what we have. We have a compressor. Now I'm going to leave this alone completely because my voice doesn't vary too much, but if I were in a situation where I had a large dynamic range which was very loud and then I spoke very quietly, then that's where compression comes into its own, in that it will take the highest levels down and bring them closer to the lower levels. I'm going to say no more than that because there's a lot more to it that can be done, but compression you either love or you loathe, so I'm going to leave compression out of it, and I'll let you play around with that. Basically you would start adjusting the sliders here and it would help you to get an idea. But with all of these, can I say, do them in increments and then you will be able to hear the subtle differences. Don't move the sliders too much at one go. Keep adjusting, listening, adjusting, listening until you get the sound to suit yourself. Now the thing that we didn't do with the EQ was to do a preset, so we're going to do a preset and we're going to save that as voice over EQ. Okay, and again, assuming that you've spent the time and you're satisfied with it, we'll set that as a default. I will still call it voiceover EQ. Likewise with the compressor, if you've adjusted it, then that's fine. We can save it as a preset, voiceover compression. Again, we've saved it as a preset. We can also save it as the default. Again, we call it that. So we've made a start now in customizing some of the items that we need to sort out. One, the quick editing, and secondly, the noise gate, the EQ and compression if we choose to add it. And then our next going to go along in the next session, I'm going to start looking at the whole arrangement, and it will be perhaps quite lengthy, but stay with it. It will help you to make things when you're recording much quicker.